The grand hall was filled with a tense silence as Zane stood at the center, the echoes of a long-forgotten language still hanging in the air. The ancient power of the Prime Lords had been awakened by his voice, and now the room trembled, the very walls seeming to come alive. Lady Lyra, eyes wide with shock, whispered, "You've awakened something that was never meant to be touched." As the floor vibrated beneath his feet, an ancient voice boomed from the walls. "You are the key. The Empire shall rise again." Zane's heart raced. He had unlocked a power that could either save or destroy the galaxy, but he wasn't ready for what came next. What is this power, and can he control it before it's too late? If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Zane Holt had never imagined that his quiet life as a linguist would bring him to the grandest diplomatic summit in the galaxy. Earth had only recently joined the galactic community, and although humanity was still young compared to the ancient species surrounding them, Zane had been chosen to represent Earth. As a translator, he would help bridge the gap between civilizations who had been traveling the stars for millennia. But even Zane, with his vast knowledge of languages, felt like an outsider among beings so far beyond humanity's reach. The summit was being held in the heart of the atrium, a vast neutral space on the ancient planet of Elorian, a world untouched by war and the politics that plagued most of the galaxy. The air buzzed with the voices of countless alien species, from the low rumblings of reptilian diplomats to the sharp clicking tones of insectoid leaders. It was a grand gathering, the largest in decades, where the most powerful minds of the galaxy had come to meet, negotiate, and share ideas. Zane sat quietly at the far end of the hall, his hands resting lightly on the cold, smooth surface of the negotiation table. As a linguist, his role was simple: translate, assist with communication, and stay in the background. He was used to feeling invisible. His species was still considered new to the galactic stage, and while humans had proven helpful in diplomacy, they were still seen as young, even insignificant compared to the civilizations around them. Zane knew this, and he had accepted it. He wasn't a warrior, nor was he a politician. He was just a man who loved language. Yet today, something felt different. There was a strange weight in the air, something that wasn't right. It wasn't just the tension that always lingered when political leaders gathered. It was something deeper. Something had shifted. A heated debate had broken out between two powerful factions. On one side stood Lady Lyra of the Solvian Alliance, a noblewoman with violet skin that shimmered like the stars, and on the other, Ambassador Vrick of the Dominion, a towering reptilian figure with scales like dark armor. Their argument had become personal, their voices rising in anger, each side claiming their history was the true history of the galaxy. "This discussion is pointless," Vrick spat, his voice thick with contempt. "Your people's claims are nothing but myths. There were no First Lords who ruled before us. The past is dust and the present belongs to the Dominion." Lady Lyra did not flinch. Instead, her golden eyes burned with restrained fury. "You speak with ignorance," she said, her voice smooth, but dangerous. "The past is not dust. The past is our foundation." Zane felt a chill as her words echoed through the hall, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire room fell silent. The two leaders were locked in a stare. But then, something unexpected happened. Lady Lyra turned, her voice soft but clear, and began speaking in a language that none of Zane's records had prepared him for. The words were unlike anything spoken in the galaxy today. They were ancient, deep, and resonated with a weight that made the very air vibrate. The walls of the hall seemed to listen as the language filled the space. Zane could feel it in his chest and his bones, as though the very foundations of Elorian were reacting to the sound. He knew that language. It wasn't just a forgotten tongue. It was the forgotten tongue, the one spoken by the ancient civilization of the Prime Lords, the earliest rulers of the galaxy, the very same people whom history had erased, whose language had been sealed away for millennia. Zane's heart pounded in his chest as Lady Lyra continued, unaware of the effect her words were having on the room. But Zane knew. He knew those words. He had read them in ancient texts, deciphered fragments of them in forgotten ruins on Earth. He had seen the symbols before, etched into the walls of ancient temples, but they were only texts. He had never imagined he would hear them spoken, let alone understand them. A wave of unease swept over him as his mind raced. Why did he know this language? He had never learned it in a formal way, had never studied it beyond the old records. Yet when Lady Lyra spoke, it felt as though the words were familiar, like a song he had heard in his dreams. Before Zane could stop himself, his mouth moved. The words came out before he could think, before he could even comprehend what he was doing. The language of the Prime Lords flowed from his lips, clear and flawless, as if it had always been part of him. The room fell silent. Dozens of alien eyes turned toward him, their gazes sharp, filled with surprise, confusion, and for some fear. Even the towering armored guards stationed along the hall froze in place. Zane's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't explain why the words had come to him so naturally, why he had spoken them with such confidence. Lady Lyra took a slow step toward him, her golden eyes wide with shock. That language. It's been dead for millennia, she whispered. No living being speaks it. There are no records of its pronunciation remaining. Zane swallowed hard, his throat dry. The realization hit him like a wave. He had just done something impossible. But what did it mean? And why had it happened now, of all times? Lady Lyra's voice trembled as she asked the question that made Zane's blood run cold. How do you speak the language of my ancestors? Zane opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He didn't know. He couldn't explain it. He wasn't special. He was just a linguist from Earth. But something deep inside him stirred. A feeling, an instinct, that maybe, just maybe, there was more to his connection with this language than he could understand. And then, just as quickly as the silence had descended, it was broken. A murmur spread across the hall, growing louder with each passing moment. There was fear now, not just from the alien diplomats, but from the walls themselves. Something ancient was waking up, something Zane had unwittingly awakened with just a few simple words. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity, the air thick with the weight of the unknown. Zane Holt had come to this summit to translate. But now he had become part of something much greater, a mystery buried in the depths of time, a mystery that had just begun to unfold. And he couldn't shake the feeling that his discovery would change everything. The room was heavy, with silence. Zane's words, spoken in the ancient language of the Prime Lord, still hung in the air. The delegates, once arguing fiercely over ancient history, now stood frozen, their eyes fixed on him. Zane could feel the weight of their gazes, a mixture of curiosity, awe, and fear. He didn't know what had just happened, but he felt it deep, within himself. Something had changed. Lady Lyra stood in front of him, her golden eyes wide with disbelief. She had taken a step closer, her breath shallow, as if trying to understand how this human could possibly speak the forbidden tongue of her ancestors. Her voice, which had been sharp and commanding just moments ago, now trembled slightly as she whispered, "That language, it's been dead for millennia. No living being speaks it. There are no records of its pronunciation left. It was sealed away." Zane's heart pounded in his chest. How could he have known the language? How could he have spoken it with such fluency? He wasn't a scholar of ancient dialects. He was a linguist, someone who studied languages, but it didn't make sense. He had read about the Prime Lords in history books, learned of their rise and fall, their power and their legacy, but he had never imagined he would become part of their story. The other delegates began to murmur among themselves, their voices low but filled with a mix of awe and suspicion. Some whispered of the ancient texts, of prophecies long forgotten. Others spoke of the forbidden knowledge that had been sealed away to prevent anyone from reclaiming the power of the Prime Lords. The air felt thick, as if the very walls of the Grand Hall were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Zane wanted to speak, to explain that he didn't know how he had spoken those words, but his voice caught in his throat. He felt like a child, lost in a world he didn't understand. And the more he tried to grasp at the fragments of his own understanding, the more it slipped through his fingers. Lady Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "You spoke it perfectly," she said, her tone now calmer, but filled with something Zane couldn't quite place. "The way you spoke the language, there was no hesitation, no confusion. You spoke it as if it were second nature, as if it had always been inside you." Zane swallowed, his mind racing. "I don't understand," he said, his voice shaky. "I've never studied it. I only saw fragments of it, symbols in old texts, carvings on ruins. But I don't know how I spoke it. I didn't mean to." Lady Lyra stepped closer, her golden eyes searching his face for answers. "Then how do you explain this?" she asked. "This language was meant to remain forgotten. It was sealed away after the fall of the Prime Lords, after their empire was destroyed in the Great War. No one was ever meant to speak it again." Zane felt his stomach twist. The weight of her words sank deep into his chest. The Prime Lords, the ancient civilization that had once ruled the galaxy, had fallen, their power scattered to the winds. The language, their language, had been hidden away, forbidden to all but a select few who had kept the secret buried in the archives of history. Zane had never believed it could still be alive, let alone spoken by someone as ordinary as him. But now, here he was, standing at the center of the galaxy's most important summit, having unlocked something no one else had dared to even think about. And the room around him was filled with delegates who feared what his discovery could mean. Lady Lyra's eyes softened as she spoke again. "The language is not just a relic of the past," she said. "It is a key to the Prime Lords' legacy, their power. And you, Zane Holt, you have awakened it." Zane's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. He had always thought of himself as a simple translator, a scholar of words. But now, with one sentence, he had unlocked something that had been sealed away for millennia. The question was, why? Why had this happened? And what did it mean for humanity? The room was silent once more, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. Zane could hear the hum of the air around him, the whisper of ancient secrets stirring in the walls of the atrium. He felt the weight of history pressing down on him. But there was something else too, something far more dangerous. The fear in Lady Lyra's eyes told him that this was not just a matter of language, this was a matter of power. The Prime Lords were not just rulers of the galaxy, Lady Lyra continued, her voice low. They were creators, builders of the star bridges, the great engines that connected entire systems. They spoke words that could shape the very fabric of reality, and their language, it was more than just communication, it was a weapon. Zane felt a chill run down his spine as the implications of her words sank in. If the language was a weapon, then what had he just unleashed? What did he have within him that allowed him to speak it? Lady Lyra's gaze turned hard. "You may have unlocked the language, Zane Holt, but you have also unlocked something much greater. The power of the Prime Lords is not just in their language, it is in their bloodline. And you—" Zane cut her off, his voice rising with a mix of fear and disbelief. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" Lady Lyra paused, her eyes narrowing. "I am saying that there is more to you than you realize. The language is not just something you learned from books. It is something you are. The bloodline of the Prime Lords must have endured, and you must be its heir." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. Zane's world tilted. He had come to this summit as a humble linguist, a translator, and now he was being told that he might be the last living heir to a lost civilization, one that had shaped the galaxy, wielded immense power, and been wiped from history. The truth was too much to bear. Zane staggered back, his mind spinning. He had never asked for this. He had never wanted to be part of something so vast, so dangerous. But now it seemed there was no turning back. Lady Lyra's voice was soft, almost reverent as she spoke again. "The galaxy will now watch you, Zane Holt. and you will either be the key to our salvation or our destruction. Zane stood frozen, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. One thing was clear. His life was no longer his own. He had uncovered a secret buried in the deepest corners of time, and now, the galaxy was watching. What would happen next? And what role would Zane Holt play in the history yet to come? The answers seemed just beyond his reach, but for the first time, he realized that he might already know more than he had ever bargained for. Zane stood at the center of the grand hall, his mind spinning with the weight of the revelations. He had come to the summit expecting nothing more than to translate ancient languages, to assist in diplomatic conversations. But now, everything had changed. The air felt thick around him, heavy with something ancient, something powerful. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Lady Lyra stood nearby, her golden eyes still locked on him, a mixture of awe and fear in her gaze. The murmurs of the delegates had quieted, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. Zane could feel it, the pulse of something ancient stirring deep within the very walls of the atrium. He had unlocked a door, one that had been sealed, away for millennia, and now whatever lay behind it was beginning to wake. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. The weight of the moment settled on his shoulders and his thoughts raced. He had spoken the forbidden language, the ancient tongue of the Prime Lords. But why? And what had he unleashed by doing so? His mind couldn't grasp the full scope of it all. But one thing was becoming clear. He wasn't just a linguist anymore. He was part of something far greater than he could have ever imagined. The hum in the air grew louder, like the distant sound of an engine starting up. Zane could feel the vibrations through the floor, a deep resonance that seemed to come from the very core of Elorian itself. It was as if the planet was reacting to the words he had spoken, as if it had been waiting for them. Lady Lyra took a step forward, her voice low but urgent. "This is not just a language, Zane," she said. "It is a key. The language you've spoken, it holds more than just words. It holds power. And by speaking it, you've awakened something that has been dormant for eons." Zane's stomach twisted. Power. The word echoed in his mind. He had always known that language had the ability to influence, to shape thoughts and emotions. But this was different. The language of the Prime Lords was more than a means of communication. It was a tool, a weapon. And now it was alive again, stirred by his words. The delegates around him were beginning to stir, their whispers growing louder. Some were frightened, others intrigued. Zane could hear the word key repeated in hushed tones, and he felt the weight of their eyes on him, as if he were a puzzle they were trying to solve. "What did I do?" Zane whispered to himself, though his voice was barely audible over the growing hum. "How did I unlock this?" Lady Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, as if she were about to offer some kind of reassurance. But instead, her expression hardened once more, and she stepped closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Prime Lords built things beyond our understanding, Zane. Their power wasn't just in their technology, it was in their language. You've opened a door to something that should have remained closed." Zane's heart skipped a beat. He had always studied the Prime Lords, their rise, their fall, their empire that spanned across the stars. But he had never believed that any of it could still exist, could still have power. Yet here he was, standing in the middle of a galactic summit, having unwittingly unlocked something that could change everything. The vibrations in the room grew stronger, more pronounced, until Zane felt as though the entire hall was shaking. He looked around, but no one else seemed to be reacting. It was as if they were all waiting for something to happen, waiting for him to make the next move. But Zane didn't know what to do. He didn't have the answers. He was just a linguist, a translator. Suddenly a low, resonant hum filled the hall, louder than the vibrations beneath their feet. It seemed to come from all around them, from the very walls of the atrium. Zane's breath caught in his throat as the sound grew deeper, more powerful. It was the sound of something ancient, something that had been waiting, sleeping for centuries. The air around him seemed to thicken, and he could feel it, an energy, a force, rising in the very fabric of the hall. It was as though the words he had spoken had stirred something beneath the surface, something that had been dormant for eons. Zane took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest, and then, without warning, the floor beneath them began to shift. Zane stumbled as the ground trembled. The walls of the hall groaned, their ancient structure responding to the growing energy. It wasn't an earthquake, but something far more unsettling. The very foundation of Elorian seemed to be reacting to the language of the Prime Lords. To the words that Zane had spoken. Lady Lyra's eyes widened as she took a step back. "It's waking," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. "You've triggered it. You've awakened the power of the First Lords." Zane's mind raced. What had he done? The room was beginning to shift, the air charged with an electricity he could feel deep in his bones. The hum was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, something that filled the entire room, overwhelming him. He had unlocked something. He had opened a door that should have stayed closed. As Zane looked around, he saw the other delegates scrambling for answers. Some were reaching for their weapons, others trying to contact their homeworlds. The atmosphere had shifted from tense diplomacy to outright panic. Zane felt the eyes of everyone on him, their expressions a mixture of fear and uncertainty. They all knew that something had been unleashed, something ancient, something powerful, and it was all because of him. The hum grew louder, the walls vibrating more intensely. Zane could feel the weight of it pressing in on him, the energy in the room building to a breaking point. Something was coming. Something was awakening, and it was reaching out toward him. As the ground beneath him trembled, Zane could hear Lady Lyra's voice again, cutting through the noise. "This is not just a language, it's a force. You've unlocked a power that no one, not even the Prime Lords, could control." Zane turned to her, his eyes wide with panic. "What do I do now?" he asked, his voice shaking. Lady Lyra's face was pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. "We can't control it, Zane. We can only hope that we can survive it." The hum reached a deafening crescendo, and then silence. For a moment, everything went still. The room, the delegates, the walls of the atrium, all of it seemed to hold its breath. And then from deep within the structure of Elorian, a voice, low, ancient, and powerful, echoed through the hall. The power of the Prime Lords had awoken. Zane. Holt had unlocked something far greater than he could have ever imagined, and now the galaxy would feel its effects. The room fell into a tense silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Zane stood frozen, his mind racing as the vibrations beneath his feet grew stronger, the hum in the air pulsing like a heartbeat. The walls of the grand hall shook, but it wasn't an earthquake. No, this was something deeper, something far more ancient. The language he had spoken, the language of the Prime Lords, had awakened something buried deep within the very foundations of Elorian. But what had he awakened? And what did it mean for him, for humanity, for the galaxy? Lady Lyra stood next to him, her face pale, her golden eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. She looked as if she had seen a ghost, and in a way perhaps she had. The power that Zane had unleashed was not just a forgotten language. It was a force that had been sealed away for millennia. The Prime Lords had used it to shape the galaxy, to build their empire, and now that power was stirring again. "This is a disaster," Lady Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "You've awoken something that was never meant to be touched." Zane felt his heart pound in his chest. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." Lady Lyra's gaze shifted to the room around them. The other delegates, once engaged in their political debates, were now staring at them, their expressions a mixture of fear, confusion, and disbelief. Some were already making plans to leave, while others were preparing for what was to come. Zane could feel the tension mounting in the air, the weight of their eyes pressing down on him. The vibrations in the room grew stronger, and Zane could feel the ground trembling beneath him. It was as if the planet itself was waking up, responding to the power that had been unleashed. The hum became a roar, vibrating through every bone in his body. Zane clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. He had to focus. He had to understand what was happening. Suddenly, the air around him shifted. It wasn't just the vibrations, it was something more. Something alive. Zane's breath caught in his throat as the walls seemed to shimmer, as if reality itself was bending and warping around them. The power of the Prime Lords, the language, the forgotten empire. Zane had awakened it all, and now there was no turning back. "I can feel it," Lady Lyra said softly, her voice barely audible. "It's awakening. The power of the First Lords. It's not just language, it's more. It's a force that once ruled the stars." Zane looked at her, his mind spinning. What does that mean? What is it? Lady Lyra took a step closer, her eyes dark with fear. "It means that you've unleashed something that can change everything. The Prime Lords were not just rulers, they were creators, builders of the star bridges and the great engines that connected entire galaxies. They spoke words that could alter the very fabric of reality. And now you've opened the door to that power." Zane felt his stomach drop. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." But Lady Lyra was no longer listening to him. She was staring ahead, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. Zane followed her line of sight, and what he saw made his heart stop. The grand hall was no longer just a room filled with delegates. The walls shimmered with an eerie glow, the air thick with energy. It was as though the very fabric of the room itself was coming alive, responding to the power that had been unleashed. The floor beneath their feet trembled as if something massive was shifting beneath the surface. "We have to leave," Lady Lyra said urgently, her voice shaking. "Now." Zane opened his mouth to speak, but before he could respond, a deep, resonant voice filled the room, booming from the very walls themselves. It was a voice like nothing he had ever heard, a voice that seemed to come from the depths of time itself. "Awaken, child of the First Lords," the voice said. "The time has come. You are the key. The bloodline endures. The empire shall rise again." Zane felt his body freeze. The voice, he knew it wasn't coming from a person. It was coming from the walls, from the very heart of Elorian. The power that had been dormant for so long was now fully awake, and Zane was at the center of it. "What is this?" Zane whispered, his voice trembling. "What's happening?" Lady Lyra turned to him, her face filled with a mixture of fear and awe. "You've been chosen, Zane. You are the last of the First Lords. The bloodline has endured, and now it is time for you to fulfill your destiny." Zane's mind raced. The last of the First Lords? He had never believed in such things. He was just a linguist, a scholar. He had no royal blood, no hidden legacy. But the voice seemed to know him, seemed to recognize something within him. I'm not a ruler," Zane said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know anything about this. I didn't choose this." Lady Lyra's expression softened for a moment, but then the urgency returned to her eyes. "It doesn't matter if you chose it, Zane. What matters is that you are the only one who can control this power. You are the key to unlocking the secrets of the First Lords. But you must act quickly. The power is not just a tool, it's a force that can either save or destroy everything." Zane felt a cold chill run down his spine. The weight of her words settled heavily on his shoulders. He had unlocked something far greater than he had ever imagined. The power of the First Lords was real, and it was now in his hands. But what could he do with it? How could he control it? The hum in the room grew louder, and Zane could feel the air crackling with energy. He could no longer deny it. The power was real, and it was waiting for him to make a choice. In that moment, Zane understood. He could not run from this. He could not deny what he had unlocked. The fate of the galaxy, the power of the First Lords, it all rested on his shoulders now. The voice from the walls spoke again, louder this time, as if it were reaching into his very soul. "Choose, child of the First Lords. Choose your path. Will you embrace your legacy, or will you let it die once more?" Zane took a deep breath, his mind finally clearing. He had no choice but to face this. The power was his to control, for better or worse, and he would have to learn to wield it, to understand it, before it consumed him and everything around him. He turned to Lady Lyra, his eyes filled with determination. "I will not let it die," he said, his voice steady. The room seemed to respond to his words, the vibrations in the air shifting, as if the galaxy itself had heard his decision. The power of the First Lords was awake, and now Zane Holt would have to decide what to do with it.